Mr. President, I was pleased to be appointed by the President to be one of the two Senate representatives to the United Nations for the 69th United Nations General Assembly session. Senator Ron Johnson, Wisconsin's the other member, and the two of us have visited New York together and have talked as to how we can best represent the legislative branch of government at the U.S. mission in New York to further the objectives that the United States has within the United Nations. Just recently, I visited New York, had a chance to meet with Helen Clark, who is the United Nations Development Program Director, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, a person who is instrumentally involved in dealing with the development programs within the United Nations. I mention that because we are now at the conclusion of the 2000 Millennium Development Goals. And I want to mention that for a moment because our goal was to reduce poverty, increase stability of governments. And as the presiding officer knows, yes, these are core U.S. principles. The presiding officer has been very active in Africa, has done an incredible job in Africa in pointing out the needs for reducing poverty and stability. It's our core principles. That's why we do it. Our humanitarian goals, yes, absolutely, our participation. But it's also important for our national security goals, because if we have nations that are prosperous, that include their people in the prosperity of their nation, have good governance, it's going to be a more stable government, and it will help us have partners who we can rely on to help us deal with world stability rather than having to call upon our military to restore order. This helps us reduce our need for conflicts around the world. So the United Nations programs dealing with the Millennium Development Goals were well received when they were conceived a decade ago. There are 8 specific goals. And what is interesting about this, the 8 specific goals had specific achievable objectives to achieve by 2015. And it was basically to reduce poverty and disease by next year, cutting in half the number of undernourished individuals on this planet, to deal with child mortality and maternal health. It was interesting that we recognized last decade that we could deal with some simple issues, such as dealing with infection on birth, dealing with nutrition, dealing with how we deal with an infant being able to breathe properly through simple devices, and that we could significantly reduce infant mortality, and we can significantly improve maternal health. So we set those goals. We set the goal of improving primary education because we knew education was the opportunity for children to be able to succeed. Gender equity and equality was a huge issue, and Secretary Clinton, as Secretary of State, was our leader on this issue globally. Combating HIV/AIDS, malaria, and other diseases. And the United States took a leadership role in the PEPFAR program that made a consequential difference in dealing with the spread of HIV/AIDS. Environmental sustainability was one of our Millennium Development Goals because we recognized that to be perhaps the greatest challenge on how we're going to deal with the sustainability of our environment with the challenges of global climate change. And we also recognized that we needed global partners for development. These are all part of the Millennium Development Goals. We recognize these are not just goals of each nation working together within the United Nations to achieve, but it also involved private foundations. It involved international organizations, NGOs, all working together in order to achieve these objectives. And guess what? Now that we are reaching that plateau, 2015, we can look back and say we accomplished a great deal for this planet. A 50% reduction in extreme poverty since the Millennium Development Goals were established. That's an incredible accomplishment. We have now safe drinking water in so many parts of the world that didn't have safe drinking water when the goals were developed. Gender disparity in education has been dramatically reduced. And it has been estimated that since the Millennium Development Goals were established, we've saved 100 million babies have survived that would otherwise not survive. Mr. President, that's an incredible accomplishment that we've been able to achieve since the development of these goals. And yes, there's much more that needs to be done. Every year, about 6 million babies die needlessly at birth. We can do much better to save more children. The Ebola crisis in West Africa teaches us that we still need to deal with basic health services in so many countries in the world. The spread of Ebola was because they were just not prepared to deal with basic health care needs. Could have reduced dramatically the spread of the Ebola virus. And we still have, unfortunately, widespread corruption in countries around the world affecting our Millennium Development Goals. Quite frankly, you can't accomplish what you want in a country, and that is to get their agricultural sustainable, to develop the health clinics that you need, to deal with gender equity, if you have corrupt governments. So dealing with the issue of good governance is clearly an area that we need to improve. So we're now talking about the post-2015 development goals, Millennium Development Goals. And the United Nations is working on that. Helen Clark, who I talked to, is working on that. They have some working documents in which they are prepared to come together as they did for the original Millennium Development Goals, which offer, again, additional opportunities. We need to build on what we've done and make sure that we have achievable goals. So I just want to mention a couple areas that I hope will be included in the post-2015 development goals. First, we need to deal with the realities of the current threats that we have. Ebola crisis points that out. It's interesting that Nigeria had a few cases of Ebola, but they were able to eradicate it. And one of the reasons they were able to eradicate it is that they had a health clinic set up from the PEPFAR money that was made available through what we did with HIV/AIDS. The point is this: let's use this opportunity, this crisis of Ebola, to make sure that we have basic health care services in all our countries so that we don't have another Ebola-type crisis in the future. That should be clearly one of our development goals. Let's deal with good governance by having anti-corruption. In my work as chair of the U.S. Helsinki Commission, we have workable ways that you can dealing with corruption in countries and how you can fight corruption. Our trade negotiators right now, which are dealing with countries that are developing countries in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, are looking at how we can improve good governance in the countries through trade legislation. We can be the leader in dealing with good governance and anti-corruption issues, and it should be a Millennium Development Goal post-2015. We need to have specific targets on educating boys and girls, on health access, on food security, climate change, good governance, and the U.S. can be a leader. I do want to point out, and the presiding officer is very much aware of this, we have taken steps in this administration and this Congress to pave the way for the post-2015 Millennium Development Goals. And they are, for example, we have Feed the Future, an initiative where we help small farmers, particularly women, in dealing with sustainable agricultural products. We don't just give food to the poor, we're looking at changing the economics within the country so that they can have sustainable agriculture. The Global Development Lab that Administrator Shaw has proposed, and again, the presiding officer is one of the leaders on that. But here, what you're doing, you're taking the USAID development assistance dollars, you're leveraging it with the work already being done by our academic centers here in America that are active internationally. I'm proud of the work that Johns Hopkins does globally, and I'm sure many members of the Senate know of the great work done by their academic centers with private companies. Why private companies? Because they get markets. They're interested in working with us to help sustainable economic progress in other countries, which helps us and allows our development assistance to be leveraged and to go further. We need to be a leader in the post-2015 goals for the Millennium Development within the United Nations. I just really want to underscore this last point. We need to do this because that's who we are. That's our values. Our values are humanitarian. We believe that we all have responsibilities to help, and that includes globally. But we do it because our national security also depends upon it. We really understand that our national security is more than our soldiers and our weapons. Very important, those who serve in our military. But our diplomacy and development assistance and having stable governments globally helps us become a more stable society, helps us with our own national security. So I urge my colleagues to be involved with us. I look forward to working with Senator Johnson at the United Nations as we pursue many, many different missions. But I hope one that we will pursue is the continuation of the Millennium Development Goals post-2015 to continue to make progress on reducing world poverty and hunger.